Okay, cool. So you're happy for me to record?
Yeah, let me see if the background is appropriate though. Like maybe let me just change it from this ugly whiteboard to something a little bit different. More interesting.
Cool. All right. So we're good to go?
Sure.
Okay. So yeah. So first up, I wanted to ask you. So the Middle East crisis. How is that affecting your business?
I think frankly, I would say that the immediate impact is relatively manageable, but the concern is more for where, we would go if the crisis continues for 3 months or 6 months or even longer. Now, obviously, there's some sort of some signs of a reprieve on the situation. There's at least the willingness to talk again in the Middle East, it seems. So we'll see how things go. Of course, nobody knows because nobody seems to be able to predict very much of anything these days. But if the most immediate impact that we've seen is just in our logistics fees, right? So logistics costs have increased. But if the situation continues, then obviously the big impact could come from the increase of fertilizer costs and the input costs going up for the farmers, especially if the trend or if the situation really continues, because a lot of the fertilizer is still, global fertilizer supplies coming from that region as well. So that's what we're kind of concerned about. I think if things were to go back to normal in the next 4 weeks, then the overall impact will be manageable. But if it continues, it could be very significant because it could be a stacking up of multiple issues, right? Just not only the logistics, but the logistics, from importing the product, from the
Sure.
creation of the product and the export of the product, everything will go up. So that's what we're sort of trying to keep an eye on. But we hope that coffee businesses have created sort of a baseline for their contracts for the year. So the harvest is almost done in Vietnam, and companies like ours have sort of created signed contracts with various suppliers to have an upper limit for what the cost will be. So hopefully we'll be able to rely on those. Luckily, the price is still far below that at the moment. So we think will be manageable, but let's see. It could if it lasts a lot longer, it could be a bad situation for Vietnam for sure.
Sure. One of the other guys I spoke to, they mentioned they were having problems with packaging, like packaging costs. Have you felt
Mhm.
that?
We have not. I mean, I don't know what suppliers you're talking to. It could be that if you're, an FMCG company with very tight margins, doing huge volumes, that these sort of issues can definitely eat into your margins very quickly.
Sure.
We don't have that issue because we're not that big. So we order packaging only 4 to 6 times per year, and so we've not really had to order or get significant, restocks of our packaging.
Okay.
Um, most of our packaging issues are just because the capacity issues in Vietnam for packaging is often limited. So if we want packaging, then we need to sometimes see if we can get it, especially as a smaller customer. But that's
Mm.
not really connected with the issue in the Middle East.
Okay. And end consumption, so people buying coffees to consume, has that changed in the past sort of month or so since they?
I mean, again, if we were a very large company like Nestle, you might have much more different experience. But we
Sure.
cater to a quite premium audience. Vietnam is the tourism figures so far this year are still very good. We did hear some people complain that this is going to impact tourism arrivals. I'm sure there has been some impact, but our numbers so far have been quite good. And we're a very heavy growth company, right? We're coming from a relatively low base compared to some of the big guys. So maybe that's also why. Maybe we would have seen faster growth, but so far our numbers are looking good. The tourism numbers that we have, because we do a lot of workshop for visitors, right? Coffee
Sure.
workshops, they're still up. And we had a record month last month. So yeah, things are looking still so far so good.
Cool, cool. And so then I also wanted to ask you about like coffee prices. Do they hugely impact you? Because you said then most people have their contracts organized. So how much when they sort of drop off? Yeah, does it matter to you even?
Oh, it definitely matters. But I
Sure.
mean, at the moment, like what we did is we set a baseline in January, and since then the prices have fallen. So we have kind of, I mean, it only covers probably about 40% of what we need for the year. So it's more of a backup. If prices go back to where they were towards the end of last year, then we are in a good position. But so far, we're actually buying direct without contracts because the price at the moment is lower.
Mm.
Um, uh, so this sort of sets up a top line for how much we're going to be paying for the rest of the year, most likely, if we manage things well and if the prices don't continue to increase too much. Um, but of course, if we are able to buy coffee at this much reduced rate, it creates more profitable situation for us overall. It's more of
Sure.
it's more of an emergency hedge, so to speak, and not really and not necessarily uh, a sort of it's an emergency mitigator, not really something that we can keep up for like 2 years or anything like that. It's more of a backup situation if we were to see prices like they were late last year.
Yeah, okay. And what about the farmers? You work directly with them, right? Like you go out there. I mean, do they worry about these lower prices, or have they just sort of become used to
Absolutely. I
the
mean,
fluctuations?
yeah, I think we came from such high prices at some point. I mean, I don't want to say that they're high prices because the farmers certainly deserve to be paid well for what they do. But the thing is that the shock and the speed at which the prices have increased over the last 3-4 years has been
Mm,
very, very tough for us because as roasters, we're essentially in the middle, right? We buy coffee farm and we buy beans at the price that the market dictates, and we often buy above that because we're buying premium grade coffee, not commodity. And so we have to buy at that rate, but our retail partners that we sell to have limitations in how much they accept for increases, and sometimes they're pretty difficult with that because they'll only accept, for example, 10% price increase year on year. But when our input costs have doubled over a year or even more, that put us in a very tough position. So you said the prices came down a lot. That's true, but they're still way above what they were 3-4 years ago. So, but 3-4 years ago, they were not sustainable. So we're in a much more comfortable position already now than what we were a year ago. So I'm not going to be complaining too much.
just sure. Cool. And so, yeah, now just moving on to sort of more general uh, about the business and setting it up and stuff like that. So I was kind of just looking at you do farm to consumer basically the whole way through. You manage it
Yeah,
yourself,
we
right?
don't
Like
own
there's no,
farms. We
yeah,
don't own any farms.
yeah,
We
yeah,
we work with farmers that own the farms, that own the land most of the time, and we work very closely to understand their production and influence their standards, of course.
sure.
We do quality control at the farm and obviously at our roastery, but we basically take green beans up to the consumer. We don't do the cultivation or processing before the green bean phase.
Sure. And so when you were developing those supply chains, particularly the foreigner, like how easy or like what sort of challenges did you run into, or was it pretty straightforward?
Yeah, I mean, the past 6 years, I think if you look at it in a condensed way, it's not easy, right? But over 6 years, and you kind of improve incrementally over 6 years, it's not too bad. But I think trust is a very important factor in these kind of relationships, and so trust is built over time. So it's not like they will give you everything you want and some from day one. You need to first buy, you need to first increase, you need to first build that relationship, and over time, trust improves, and they will be more welcoming to your input. And you will, as your volumes increase with certain farms, you'll obviously have an increased say over how they manage their farms. And I'm not saying say, but you can have a bigger influence on how they manage their farms and how they process the beans. So uh, it was not easy. I don't think it's easy. That's one of the reasons why companies like Mexico do so well, because they're the glue between the people who grow the coffee and
Sure.
the buyers internationally. Um, but our relationship with the handful of farmers that we work with directly, we work with maybe about 12 farms most of the time,
Mhm.
is very good. And the trust is improved, and that's a two-way street. It's not just us to them, but it's them to us as well. And I'm quite confident with it, but I cannot say that it was a sort of straightforward thing. And me being a foreigner does not make it necessarily easier. There are benefits, though. Obviously, the cultural etiquette that is required if
Mm.
it's a Vietnamese to Vietnamese relationship is very different than if it's a Vietnamese to foreigner relationship. That's just like
Sure.
if you were to visit most countries, and if you do something wrong, they're not going to be immediately like, that's strange that they're doing it wrong, because they think, oh, that guy's from a different culture. And so they're a little bit more flexible somehow. But at the end of the day, making sure that you follow the agreement, pay on time, all that sort of stuff is very important.
Sure. And so going the sort of the other way then, like selling your product on, firstly, like business to business, how straightforward was that?
So, I think I probably too fast, and I realized this like late last year or towards the, halfway through last year, too quickly tried to prioritize export, and we were not strong, and we're still not strong enough domestically to really have a good foundation so that we can do a good job with our exports. And so, we're going to continue doing exports, but what we've decided now is to really focus on Vietnam first, and to
Mm.
have a stronger foundation at home with our sales network. So it's not easy, because a lot of the hospitality in particular sees coffee very much as a cost still, and not as an opportunity. And so it's our job to sort of make our hospitality partners see coffee more as an opportunity to connect with their guests in a meaningful way, for them to communicate something local, a local experience, but a very high quality, and to also see it as a business opportunity rather than just a cost, right? At the moment, most hotels, first of all, they still, like, I would say 95% of, then let's say 4 and 5 star hotels still really focus on European style of coffee, right? So if you go, it's like they have lattes, they have cappuccinos, they have espresso, they have americano, they have all these different European style coffees. And then they have at the bottom of the menu, Café Den, Café Sur, and that's it. And then they have a sort of a legacy coffee supplier who still adds a lot of artificial products and into their coffee blends, like artificial flavor, butter, soybean, that sort of stuff.
Mm.
And sometimes they're not even aware that the ingredients of the product that they're using is like so out of date. And so it's our job to really say, hey, first of all, why don't we focus, like, why don't we make sure that the Vietnamese coffee drinks is at least as good as the European style coffee drinks?
Mm,
Because also, when you're a foreigner and you're visiting Vietnam, at least from my perspective, I'd like to try the local style coffees, right? That was what I would be personally interested in, especially given Vietnamese coffees really on the up as a sort of a coffee category in the world. So, what we're trying to do is get people to buy better quality coffee for those drinks and more options. So not just the beans, but also the drinks. So cafe muy, salted coffee, coconut coffee, even egg coffee potentially. There's a little bit of hygiene issue with some people, some hotels are concerned about, but there's so much more than just cafe den, cafe solo. It's always an afterthought, and they always consider it more like a cost, like breakfast, where it's a cost and all, and people don't want to pay. And instead, why don't they make really good coffee drinks and charge people? Not maybe at breakfast, but in the lounge, for example.
mm, totally. And so then consumers, Vietnamese consumers, which you say you're going to target now, um, how do you find, I mean, from what you're saying, it sounds like you focus mostly on Vietnamese style coffees, selling
Yeah,
to
yeah. We
Vietnamese
we only
consumers.
source domestic beans, and we have an espresso blend. We have a pour over blend, but our most important product by far is our Fin blend, our Vietnamese style blend. But our product it's a 2-star great taste award from the UK. It's um, it's the powerhouse behind our recipes. So our idea is a little bit that we focus on the Vietnamese drinks. Yeah.
Sure. And so do you sell a lot of those to Vietnamese customers though, or is it more like tourists?
Well, it's not just tourists, it's also a lot of business travelers, but
Sure.
I would say about half of it's depends. We sell our products to GS25, and by far most of the
Right.
consumers in GS25 are still Vietnamese. But usually those type of products are still our second label, because our second label is a little bit less, like, it's more affordable, and it's a little bit like less yeah, it's not using like specialty grade beans and things like that. So our signature, I would say, probably it's a little bit more for 5-star hotels, a little bit more for tourists. Um, but we see Vietnamese consumers buying that every day. It's an expensive product if you compare it to like Trung Nguyen, for example. But what we always think about is we're making products for the future, right? We're making
Sure.
products for the future of Vietnam, and I don't see young Vietnamese consumers saying, "Hey, what I want is I want to drink more artificial flavored coffees." And most of them are becoming more and more aware, and um, with the quality of the cafes, Highlands already, from my understanding at least, doesn't use artificial in most of their products. Every half doesn't use artificial in most of their products. So that's the way that Vietnam is going. Some
Sure.
of our products is maybe a little bit ahead of that trend, but we're trying to make things so that Vietnam can grow into our product portfolio. It might not be exactly what they need right now, though. Not
Sure.
for everybody, at least.
Sure. And do you find Vietnamese consumers embrace Western coffees? Um,
Oh, absolutely,
yeah.
but the reason why we're not as focused on it is because we see ourselves as a cultural company as much as a coffee company. We see our products as ways to bridge conversations between the country and the rest of the world. And so we represent Vietnamese coffees, even though we do have the espresso blend and the filter blend. Like, the Vietnamese style coffees is what we like to talk about the most. And from a strategic perspective, it's also, frankly, the one that's the most underinvested in. When you look at, 5-star hotels, like, there's, 3 or 4 espresso machines, each one of them is $5,000, but no nice fin coffee service, and that's a much cheaper, much lower barrier to entry kind of thing. So,
Sure.
but you see Folier, you see Perfetto, you see all these coffee companies, and they're all focused on European coffees for some reason. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for companies who are interested in focusing on Vietnamese coffees more.
Sure, sure. I've always found that very strange myself that a lot of these cafes were pushing Western coffees when I'm like, Vietnamese coffee is is fantastic, right? It's a great product.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, but you
unique.
just but the thing is, it's always done with low quality ingredients, right? Like really cheap
Mm,
beans and really low quality robusta. Like we make products that with really high quality robusta, and so you don't really need to add so much stuff to it to make it taste good. And so I think that over time it will improve, but we need to make sure that people come to realization that they need to that they need to seize that opportunity more, especially in hospitality. There's a
sure.
big opportunity around local style drinks, but executed at a high level.
Cool, cool. All right, man. That's plenty for me. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, no, I'm curious to hear about what you're gonna do or see what you're gonna do with it. And if there's something that I can be a little bit more insightful for, maybe if we want to do it next time, maybe I can get the questions in advance so I can develop my thinking a little bit more
Sure.
on the subjects.
Perfect. I think that was great. Like that was all I was looking for.
Okay, good.
I quite like it off the top of the head rather than having it too sort of formal. Um, yeah, I'll send you through what I do. One of the things I've been thinking about. A lot of people have a lot of interest in coffee in Vietnam. I mean, it's pretty big traded, right? Commodity.
Yeah.
So anything you sort of write about coffee generally tends to get a bit of traffic. One of the things I was looking at doing, and it's just an idea at the moment. I wanted to start putting out like a monthly coffee report and sending it out to like, there's a lot of coffee online, like media outlets, like coffee. Do you know what I mean? And trying to syndicate it. I don't know if I'll go ahead and do that, but I don't know. That's something maybe you want to keep in mind. It looks much better when I have comments from someone who's in the industry on the ground. You can sort of
Yeah,
talk
no,
about it.
I'm happy to contribute, as long as if you can link to lacaf.com and
Yeah,
also,
happy to do that.
and then link to if it's my name, maybe you can link to my LinkedIn or something like that.
Sure, happy
And
to.
and yeah, and um yeah, I mean I'm interested, I really believe in the quality of Vietnamese coffee beans. I think that there's um one, I often say that what we're trying to do with La Caf could not have been done 10 years ago in Vietnam, because Vietnamese coffee farmers 10 years ago were still not really like focused on quality. And that over just 10 years, that has changed a lot. It's unbelievable. And I think a big reason is because young coffee farmers are taking over the business, right? People that are in their
Mm,
sometimes late 20s or 30s. They're taking over the family farm. Sometimes they went to college in the city, and just city life didn't appeal to them, and then they decided to go back. And then but they have that, they speak English, they have that exposure
mm,
to a new way of thinking, to research, to the internet. And so they are far more open to new ideas around coffee cultivation and processing. And they're far more aware about the possibilities, where their parents were very, they just were taught what to do by people over the years, whether it was maybe their parents or their
sure.
fertilizer suppliers, or whatever, who were selling them things, and they were like overusing fertilizer because of that.
Mm,
Synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Um, and so these younger people are taking over. That's the first thing. And the second thing is that there's a huge consumer base in Vietnam for coffee already, right? It's
mm,
it's I think it's different than many other sourcing countries. Many other sourcing countries, I would venture to say like 98% of their um, beans are exported. But in
yeah.
Vietnam, there's a very strong consumer base, and there's a lot of people, again, in their 20s and 30s, that are really into high quality coffee. The young baristas working at every half, and their friends and their network, and all these young people, and they understand what is good coffee. They have formal and informal education around coffee. And so what's happening is, because there's such a physically short distance between farmers and consumers, um, the feedback loop is so much faster and so much shorter than most other cultivating countries. So most, farmers, let's say in
Interesting.
Kenya, will, not have the opportunity to speak to people who actually roast or drink their coffees very often. And
Yeah.
and they might get feedback on a crop a year or 2 years later, right? If at all. And while here, I see some of the farmers that I work with 2 or 3 times a year, and my team maybe another couple times as well. And then there are other brands that they work with that also are coming by visiting, or they come to visit us or whatever. And you multiply that up by the 12 farms that we work with, and then all the brands. So there's way more frequent, immediate conversations between the people who are cultivating and processing, and the roasters and the consumers. And so the speed at improvement in Vietnam of high quality coffee is, I believe, never been seen before in the history of the world. Um, where Panama, Geisha, and all this sort of stuff. I mean, still, these are coffee products that are very niche towards a very specific specialty coffee audience. But but that has been achieved over decades of gradual improvement. And but Vietnam was nowhere with specialty coffee 10 years ago. And now there are some very, very good products being made in Vietnam. Very good. I'm talking about the green bean
Mm.
specifically, coming out of some of these farms. And and that's over a very short period of time. I don't think it's world class yet. I don't think it's like, going to be featured as the winning coffee at the Barista Championship, World Championship in the next couple of years. But if you see the improvement over the last 10 years and the rate of improvement now, then I think in 10 years from now, Vietnamese coffee, like not as a concept, but some of the farms are going to be producing some crazy stuff in 10 years from now. And so that's because of that incredibly short feedback loop that we have here.
Yeah, that's such an interesting observation too. I never really thought about it, but it makes total sense, right? Like you're consuming the product that you sell yourself, as opposed to you see a lot of companies or people that don't use their own product. Um, but yeah,
Yeah, and
super,
and that's why,
super
like, my
interesting.
wife and I, we have this project we call Cup to Farm. And it's basically putting the farm to cup idea but on its head. So instead of farm to cup, it's cup to farm. And the reason is because what our idea is we actually roast the coffees, and then we bring these coffees back to the farm, and we drink the coffees together with farmers. And we talk about it. Not always it's their coffee, it's sometimes from the region or something like that. But we just have a chat and talk about the coffee, but also talk about their lives, get to understand them better and things like that. Um I think that idea of that feedback loop, so making sure that not just the farm to cup, but the cup goes back to the farm, and that kind of continuous
Sure.
cycle. I hope that can speed up, and I think it'll speed up even more in the next 10 years, because farmers are becoming also more open to having feedback, which was not the case at
Mm.
all 6 years ago when I started talking to people. But that's a trust issue again, right? Like once you know them for 6 years, they're more open to your ideas. But also they're seeing the impact, right? Like their parents' beans were sold at market rate. That's it. And now, because of the improvements that they made, they can actually sell it for 2 or 3 times market rate. Even
Sure.
though maybe the quantity has gone down, which is usually the case if you try to improve the quality. Um, they're still much more profitable. Also because they've been able to reduce their inputs, because they were using way too many inputs in the past.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Cool. All right, man. I'm a bit mindful of time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. I'll let you know how
Yeah.
it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Enjoy the
Yeah.
rest
Let
of
me
your
know if
day.
you want to want to talk more, and
Sure.
happy to see what you're working on. And I have a newsletter that I try to post a bit on, but I'm not really a good writer. So, but it's called Cup to Farm Coffee Store, a coffee newsletter on LinkedIn. You can have a look there.
Up
I
to
post
farm
it
on LinkedIn.
once in a while. Yeah.
Sure, I'll have a look.
And then my wife and I are opening a small cafe in probably in July or August or so. And it's going to be all about, it's going to be a cafe that features only specialty coffees from Vietnam. It's the only thing we have. We don't have Kenyan, we don't have Ethiopia, we don't have Panama, we don't have, Peru. And the reason is because we noticed that a lot of coffee farmers are making excellent product, but they can't always find the buyers. So what we did is we're going to have a place. It's kind of like a wine bar, but then for
Sure.
coffee. So you have like 30 different coffees that you can try.
I feel like if you try 30 coffees, 30 Vietnamese coffees, though, you're going to be pretty buzzed, right?
Yeah, but the style is a bit different, so it's
Sure.
not really geared towards like super dense Robusta style. So it's more about the flavor of the coffee itself. So we're not
Mm,
gonna like, I mean, you can get a cafe soda. It's not like we don't have it at all, but it's not gonna be focused on like fancy drinks. It's gonna be like
sure.
mostly pour overs and stuff. And then when you do multiple drinks, you're not gonna have a whole glass. You'll have like little cups,
The
like
shot
to sip.
glasses. Sure. Uh, do you notice a difference between the coffee in Hanoi and the coffee in Saigon?
People's preferences tend to be a bit different, and in the
Sure.
South, it's very, very focused on iced products, on iced drinks more
Sure.
than the North. Um, uh, yeah, I mean, there might be some sort of, I mean, there's a preferential difference, right? Coffee is not as big in Hanoi because there's a little bit more still the tea culture, although that's changing.
Sure.
Um, so what is your observation?
So I lived in Hanoi for a long time, and then I was down in Ho Chi Minh last year for about a year. Um, I don't. I think the coffee was better in Hanoi, but I think everywhere you went
Mm,
in Hanoi, you could get a just a regular Vietnamese coffee, and you couldn't really get like Western coffee was really only in like the
hmm.
old quarter or Teho. When I moved to Saigon, though, I found like most cafes, even like the ones on the street, some of them had little espresso machines, and they would make Vietnamese coffee with an espresso machine, which I
Yeah,
I don't think is right. Like I'm just like that's kind of blending the two together is very very wrong. Um,
yeah.
yeah, you said it drove me crazy. I was like, I just
So
want. I ended
you
up.
know that phenomena with the um cafe nyamai, cafe mai, like machine coffee it's called,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. Yeah.
So they call it cafe mai, like machine coffee. And they have these espresso machines and I find it actually impressive, because sometimes you go to the middle of nowhere and they have now espresso machines there. But you know what I've realized is that part of the reason why it's popular is because it's ground coffee to your drink. So so a lot of Vietnamese are quite concerned about what's in their drinks, what's in the coffee, right? Because
Sure.
of all these scandals about food safety and about, there was like, battery acid coffee. And then there was
Yeah.
like recently also all this fake coffee that was found out. And so a lot of those are actually, there's a grinder and then the machine. So they can see the beans being ground, go into the machine, and then they drink that. And so somehow they feel
Yeah.
like
Okay.
it's way more trustworthy than some sort of random bag that somebody's scooping some pre-ground coffee out of and putting it into a fin brewer. And a little bit the fancy, of course, as well, right? The fancy element. So, um, but yeah, it is interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was, yeah, it was very upsetting. Even I was in Kang Ha for a bit as well, and there was the same thing. They would make all their Vietnamese coffee with espresso. But how do you not know that this is not how a Vietnamese coffee should taste?
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway, it was the interesting experience, but yeah. Okay, cool. All right, man. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah. My pleasure.
You enjoy
We'll
the
be in
rest of it.
touch.
Yeah, we'll do, mate. Cheers.
Cheers, Mark. See you. Bye.
Bye.